Are you looking for some depth here on your fantasy football roster to help you make it down the home stretch to the playoff run? I got some names for you. These are some possible trade targets here second half of the season. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there. And today, we're talking about, players that you can possibly target in trades. Let's be realistic, right? There's not a whole lot of team owners out there that are willing to part ways with their stud running backs and their stud wide receivers. But that doesn't mean that you can't go out there, make some trade offers, and get some great depth on your roster to help you make a run at the fantasy playoffs. I got a quarterback, 3 running backs, and 3 wide receivers that you can all target and realistically get in your leagues. Hopefully this will help you make that playoff run because it's right around the corner. Let's get into this list. All right, the quarterback that I really want to try to target right now is Cam Newton. And I know a lot of you guys are probably saying, well, Cam's one of the top quarterbacks. And yes, he is, but there's so much depth at quarterback this season. You should be able to work out a trade to include him in it. And if you haven't taken a look at his end of season schedule, it lines up perfectly for a playoff run. So if you're one of these teams, entrenched in first place, or you need some quarterback depth, Cam Newton, his last few games of the season, of the fantasy football season, depending on when your championship game starts, this is Week 17, New Orleans, great matchup. Week 16, Atlanta, great matchup again. Week 15, New Orleans once again, even better matchup. Then Week 15, the Cleveland Browns. Great matchup again. Week before that, Week 14, the Tampa Bay Bucks. Those are 5 awesome games to end the season with. If you're looking to make a deep run into the playoffs, Cam Newton is definitely somebody that can provide you a lot of value. So far this year, he's quarterback 4. So yes, he's towards the top. But like I said, there's so much depth at quarterback that you can just swap quarterbacks, and a lot of people may not pay attention to it. He's been super consistent. Multiple touchdown passes every single game this year with the exception of Week 1. He's just now finally starting to lean more on the running game. He's had 21 rush attempts the past 2 weeks combined. Things are really starting to line up for Cam Newton to have a great second half of the season. And if you can get him, if you can include him in a trade, grabbing Cam Newton now could greatly increase your chances at making a deep run in the fantasy playoffs. For running back, I got Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, probably the Mixon owner is pretty happy with what they've gotten from him thus far. Yes, he missed 2 games early with that knee surgery, but the game before the bye week had 123 yards and 2 touchdowns. Great game for Joe Mixon. Now he's on the bye week, coming off the bye week this week for Week 10. And there's rumors starting that Giovanni Bernard could be close to returning. That may be a piece that you can use in negotiations to get the Mixon owner to bite. Try to sell maybe one of these lower-end running backs. I would trade somebody like a Mark Ingram. Heck, I would even give up like a Leonard Fournette, something like that that's a little bit farther down the rankings right now that has the name value to try to see if I can get the Joe Mixon owner to trade him away. He has a great schedule second half of the season also. Yes, he's going to come out here Week 10. He has a tough matchup against the Saints next week against the Ravens. You can sell the owner on that also. Listen, he's got 2 of the toughest run defenses on the schedule the next 2 weeks. I'll take him from you, and I'll limit that for you, and in turn, I'll give you running back X, whoever that may be. After that, though, Joe Mixon's schedule gets great from weeks 12 to 16, and that's definitely something you want to make that playoff run. He's got matchups against Cleveland, Denver, the Chargers, Oakland, and then Cleveland again, all right there to wrap up the season. Great matchups for the fantasy championship and fantasy playoffs, and definitely somebody that I'm trying to target and get away from any owners that have him in as many leagues as possible. He's somebody that could provide huge value down the stretch for you if you're able to get him. Next up is going to be Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers, and yes, I get it. He hasn't been overly effective so far year-to-date since coming back from his suspension. Hasn't had more than 86 yards and a touchdown in a game. Sometimes his usage is irritating because Mike McCarthy seems to temper his touches at times, but he's somebody with huge upside. He has the home run ability. He's going to get you double-digit touches each week. Not so much in the passing game, but he's still highly involved in the offense, has a decent schedule second half of the season, and let's be realistic. This is the Green Bay Packers, and almost every season they make a run there late trying to get into the playoffs to make that playoff push. If that's going to happen, Aaron Jones needs to be a part of the game plan. They're going to have to open up the run game to allow Aaron Rodgers to have more options in the passing game. It sounds like Geronimo Allison's done for the fantasy football year anyway. That's going to, leave MVS, Equanimeous St. Brown, Devontae Adams, Jimmy Graham on the outside. But in order to give them more space, they need to open up the run game. That's going to be where Aaron Jones comes in. He really only has 2 more tough matchups on the year. He's got Minnesota and Chicago. Other than that, he's got great matchups against Miami, Arizona, Atlanta, the Jets, Detroit. He's got great matchups coming up here second half of the season. He could be somebody that you could get dirt cheap as a throw-in in a trade, because everything in the news is that, his touches are limited. Those touches could go up here second half of the year. You could get yourself a solid running back too for hardly anything, and he's got great upside. Last running back is going to be Alex Collins, and I understand as soon as I said his name, a few of you guys probably, gagged a little bit because you don't really like Alex Collins. But he has the easiest remaining strength of schedule out of any running back in football going forward. He's had double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues, 3 out of the last 4 weeks, 4 touchdowns over the last 4 games. He's somebody who is somewhat touchdown dependent, but he's starting to get the usage. Yes, last week, only 9 carries for 35 yards and a touchdown, but his owners are kind of expecting more to this point. And if you can go out there and grab Alex Collins, the hardest run defense that he faces for the rest of the season is in Week 16. The Los Angeles Chargers, who are the 14th ranked defense against opposing running backs. Everybody else is easier. He's got Cincinnati, Oakland, Atlanta, Kansas City, Tampa Bay, Cleveland, and then those Chargers. Great second half schedule. Easiest schedule by far of any remaining running back. And if you can grab him and he can continue this potential, trend up, you could have yourself a solid running back too that you can get here week 10 and possibly only have to give up a wide receiver to. Maybe he's on a roster who needs some wide receivers. Look at your league. Look at that opponent. See what they need. See if you can make something fit, because Alex Collins could be a cheap way for you to get a solid running back here down the stretch. Moving on to wide receiver, let's talk about Calvin Ridley of the Atlanta Falcons. He's probably somebody whose value slightly increased here after last week's performance against the Redskins. 6 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown. That's a little bit unfortunate, but more than likely, the roster that he's on, he's probably their wide receiver 3 or 4, and maybe they're in need of a tight end or a running back, something that you have a little bit more of, a little bit more depth of. This is the time to grab Calvin Ridley. You can look at the remaining strength of schedule, which is great. They're 13th overall, decent remaining schedule. But you have to remember, this guy's going to play the majority of his snaps out of the slot. All the top cover corners, they're going to be on Julio and Mohamed Sanu. Calvin Ridley's going to spend the majority of his times in the slot, and we've seen how he can dominate slot linebackers, slot DBs, whatever they put on him. Calvin Ridley is an elite talent. And if you can grab him, and you can grab him now, it is the best possible time to do it. They have remaining games going up against the likes of New Orleans, Green Bay, Carolina, Tampa Bay, Arizona. All very winnable games for Calvin Ridley, where he can give you great value down the stretch. If you're looking for some bench depth at wide receiver, maybe you're really struggling at wide receiver, Calvin Ridley should definitely be on your radar and somebody that you're trying to get away from whoever has him in your league. The next wide receiver is going to be Sterling Shepard of the New York Giants. Somebody else who I think has huge upside here second half of the year. They're coming off the bye week. Obviously, Odell Beckham is going to draw the bulk of the coverage for the opposing defense. That's just how it's going to be. In the preseason, there was a lot of people worried that Evan Ingram was going to take targets away from Sterling Shepard. That really hasn't happened. If anything, I think Saquon Barkley is more involved in the pass game than a lot of people had projected, and that may be taking some targets away from Sterling Shepard. His game before the bye week, 4 catches for 34 yards. Nothing great. But however, the week before that against Atlanta, he had 5 catches for 167. He has a huge ceiling, and he's capable of putting up big numbers. He hasn't been overly consistent this year, so that means you can get him a little bit cheaper, which is great. They have the 8th easiest remaining strength of schedule for the Giants, and really their only tough matchup rest of season is Week 17 against the Dallas Cowboys. Outside of that, all great matchups. San Francisco, Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, Chicago, Washington, Tennessee, Indianapolis. And remember, once again, similar to Ridley, yes, some of these teams have locked down corners on them. I get it. But they're going to be on Odell. All the defensive attention is always going to be Odell and Saquon Barkley. Sterling Shepard could benefit from that, and he's somebody you could get from cheap. for cheap, and you could actually, bolster your roster. Give yourself some added wide receiver depth in case you have any injuries down the stretch here. Sterling Shepard is somebody you could put in at a moment's notice and know that you have a solid play week to week. The last wide receiver is going to be Larry Fitzgerald of the Arizona Cardinals. Somebody who went on the bye week and had a great week the week before against the San Francisco 49ers. 8 catches, 102 yards, and a touchdown. 2 straight weeks with touchdowns. New offensive coordinator there with Byron Leftwich. They're making a conscious effort to try to get the ball more to Larry Fitzgerald and David Johnson. He's coming off the bye week, having an opportunity to rest up a little bit. He had some nagging injuries that seem to be behind him now, and he has one of the easiest remaining strength of schedules of all wide receivers. Currently the 6th easiest remaining schedule among all wide receivers in football. And there's some juicy matchups in there. And you got to remember, the Arizona defense is not what you would call elite. They can't run the ball either. They're struggling to get David Johnson going. They're trying to get it going, but that offensive line limits the upside of the run game. What does that turn into? More throwing, more Larry Fitzgerald. And Josh Rosen has looked improved here in the past few weeks before the bye week, able to deliver the ball, showing some poise in the pocket despite being, actually running for his life. Larry Fitzgerald is somebody who you definitely need to target. Great matchups here to end the year. Coming up against the Kansas City Chiefs. A lot of throwing going on against that game. Oakland Raiders. I think I could throw against the Raiders. Then you got the Chargers, the Packers, the Lions, the Falcons, the Rams, and the Seahawks. All decent matchups here that can give you some solid bench depth. Somebody who's probably actually able to be traded. I could go out here and say, hey, try to go get Julio Jones. Try to go get Odell Beckham. But come on, a lot of those owners aren't going to let go of those guys unless you offer up a huge piece of your roster. Larry Fitzgerald is one of these guys who's kind of been on the fence for a lot of teams. Maybe he was dropped and just picked up 2 weeks ago. If it is, throw an offer for him out there. He still has high wide receiver 2 upside. And if you can grab him for cheap, he could definitely be somebody to help you carry the second half of the season all the way up into the playoff run. I do like Larry Fitzgerald, and if you can grab him, he's somebody that I'm looking to grab. All right, those are 7 guys that I'm trying to actively go out there and grab in as many leagues as I can just for their potential upside alone here, second half of the season. Trying to make a run at the fantasy playoffs, trying to win some championships just like you guys. These are all guys who I feel have great upside second half of the season, and they aren't those elite names. Yes, it's great. Go out there and get Melvin Gordon or Saquon Barkley if you can, but a lot of the owners at this point of the year, if they have them, they're not getting rid of them because they've seen their potential upside. Trying to give you guys some names that are actually attainable, that you actually have a chance to go out there and get from most owners. Hopefully that was able to help out a lot. I really appreciate your guys' support. Make sure you guys are liking and subscribing to the channel. Look forward to talking to you. And happy week 10 of the fantasy football season.